My name is Joey Hicks, and I go to the Effingham campus. I never really fit in elementary school, and then I went into middle school with COVID times. Definitely didn't fit in there, found myself trying to be someone I wasn't to fit in with a specific group. He delivered me from a situation where I was drifting further and further away from Christ, and just being able to realize Christ in its full capacity is just such a blessing. My friends showed up to my front door and said, "Hey, you're coming to Bible study with us," and brought me as I was. I had flour all over my shirt, I was baking, brought me to Bible study and was like, "Hey, this is what this is about." And seeing that was something that I'd never felt before in my life, was feeling included, feeling I was a part of something, and feeling the love of that community. So it definitely was completely different than what it was like before I came back to Compassion. I mean, I thought being a Christian was something that was just a Sunday chore, and now it's an everyday adventure. When I started serving, my parents started asking a lot of questions. What does serving look like? Why do you sacrifice so much? It is a sacrifice, but seeing the good that comes out of it and being part of that is just such a blessing. My entire family serves now. Seeing them plug in, find their spot, see where they can help, has totally bonded my family closer. For me, I think kingdom worker means just, leaving your agenda at the door, using your God-given gifts and abilities, and just laying it down for a better purpose and his plan. Being able to be there for the kids and just seeing how talking with them and being there for them is something I maybe didn't have as much when I was a kid, but being able to do that for them really just fills my cup. One of my kids just got baptized, and just seeing that growth from him keeps fueling me, and just plugging myself into where there's a need. Plug yourself in, use those gifts that you have, and see how it can just amplify what the church is talking about. I was sitting in that seat watching these Kingdom Worker videos and be like, man, that's so cool watching them do that. And I made the decision to get baptized at my rising sophomore camp. So being able to, help kids make that decision and help students make that decision in their day every Sunday is such a blessing. And so camp is just such a meaningful time of year to me, and it means so much because that's where I made the decision to get baptized. That's when I made the decision to go all in. Living on fire for God has been the best thing in my life.
Well, good morning, Compassion. My name is John Mark Romans. I'm the Global Engagement Pastor here at the church, and it's my privilege and joy to start us off in this new series on evangelism, about sharing your relationship with Jesus with other people around you. And we're calling this series, Your Move. In order to kind of explain why we chose that title for this series, I want to remind you of a movie that came out a long time ago. It was a movie called We Were Soldiers. I don't know if you guys, it's kind of a guy movie, but it's a movie that came out quite a while ago. It starred Mel Gibson, and Mel Gibson played a real-life commander that was in the Vietnam War. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. Now, Hal Moore was an exceptional leader of men, and he is famous for a lot of things that happened on the battlefield, but I think the thing that he is probably most famous for was a speech he gave his men before they even left for Vietnam. He lined all of his men up front, and he stood in front of them, and he said, "My promise to you is that I will be the very first person to step foot on the battlefield, and I will be the last one to leave." And if you think about that for a second, that sounds a lot like Jesus. You see, God didn't sit on his throne up in heaven, excuse me, and just look down at his creation that had made all these terrible mistakes and say, "Listen, you guys are all lost, you guys are all in a terrible state, so just figure out how to find your way home." God instead made the first move. He sent Jesus to earth so that he could seek and save you and me and all people. Now, after Hal Moore gave that very famous speech, "I'm gonna be the first one on the battlefield, and I'll be the last one to step off," his men didn't just gather around him and clap him on the back, shake his hand and say, "Sir, that's a great speech. That was inspiring. We're gonna hang out back here. You just let us know how it goes." Instead, they were expected to follow the example of their leader. Jesus expects the same of us. He made the first move, and now it's our time. Now, I wanna explain why we're gonna devote almost an entire month of this year, 3 weeks we're gonna devote to talking about evangelism, about how you can share your story and your relationship with God with other people around you. The reason we're doing that is because God's heart is for lost people. God's heart is for lost people. 1 Timothy chapter 2 says this, God our Savior wants all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. God's heart is for lost people, and the church exists to reach them. And if you weren't sure about that, Paul said that in 2 Corinthians when he said, we, you and me, are therefore Christ's ambassadors as though God were making his appeal through us. God makes his appeal to a lost and dying world through you and me. Now, I understand how this goes, okay? Whether you're here at the broadcast campus or you're listening across one of our other 6 campuses, I know how it goes when a preacher stands up front and he says, we're gonna talk about evangelism. People start to get nervous. Maybe you're already starting to feel that knot in the pit of your stomach. Now, here's the deal. People generally get nervous and anxious and a little bit scared and intimidated when you start talking about evangelism for one of 2 reasons. The first one is this. Generally, they say this, listen, I just don't know enough. I just don't know enough. I've never read the Bible all the way through. I mean, what if somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer to? I just don't know enough, and so it's better if I don't even try. The second reason that they'll often give is, I'm just actually not very good at it. I'm just not that good. You know, I'll leave that to Marcus, I'll leave that to Ken, I'll leave that to my campus pastor. They're much better at this than me, and so I'm just not gonna worry about this too much. Somebody else can do it who's better at it than I am. Now, if that's your position, I just don't know enough or I'm just not very good at it, I want to just push back a little bit. Because here's the deal. We talk about the things that we think about most often. You talk about the things that you think about most often. Let me give you a personal example. Okay, I try to stay relatively healthy. I try to stay relatively fit, okay? Try to eat right and all that other sort of thing. And one of the things that I enjoy doing is I enjoy running triathlons from time to time. Now, here's the deal. This is not false humility, it's not a humble brag, this is the honest truth, okay? I am not that great of a triathlete. I'm not. I'm nowhere close to pro. I'm nowhere near an elite level triathlete. And listen, there's a lot of other people that are much better at triathlons than I am. I'm a very middle of the pack kind of guy. There's a lot of other people that are better at it than I am. Here's the other thing about it. I don't know a whole lot about triathlons. Honestly, I don't. There's so much about swimming technique I don't understand, so much about cycling, power to weight ratio and wattage and all that other stuff, so much about running form and nutrition and fueling. There's so much about triathlons I don't know, but I still talk about it. And I'm just not even that great. I'm pretty middle. I'm pretty average, actually. But I still talk about it. People ask me about it, I'll answer. Sometimes I bring it up myself, like I just did just now. But if you think about it for a second, there's something that you can identify in your own life that you enjoy. Maybe it's a hobby. Maybe it's something you like to watch, something you like to do, or something you're exploring right now. You're thinking about getting into something else. I promise you, listen, there's something about whatever that thing is, hunting, fishing, watching college football, whatever it happens to be. There's a girl version in there somewhere. I can't think about it right now. But there's something in there that you're thinking about, that you're excited about. I promise somebody else knows more about it than you do. It doesn't stop you from talking about it, right? Think about it. There's somebody better at whatever it is that's in your mind right now. There's somebody better at it than you are. It doesn't stop you from talking about it. And so this idea that I just don't know enough, and I'm just not very good at it, it really doesn't hold up as a valid reason to not talk to somebody about your faith in Jesus. Now, everybody take a breath because I want you to just relax. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not gonna give you an assignment at the end of this message that says, hey, I want you to go out and talk to somebody about your relationship with Jesus. Come back next week and tell me about how it went. I'm not going to give you that homework assignment. I want you to listen for the remainder of this message. I want you to just listen to me. I want you to understand why this is important. Now, in the coming weeks, there's gonna be some other exceptional communicators that are gonna talk about what evangelism can look like, particularly as it relates to your story, what God has done in your life. And there's gonna be somebody else that's gonna talk about how to do that, give you like different tools so that you can engage with this. What I wanna do for the remainder of this message is talk about why evangelism is important. Because if you don't understand why, you're not gonna care what it can look like or how to even do it. And the why is because evangelism begins in the heart of God before it ever becomes the responsibility of the church. Jesus said he came to seek and save the lost. And every single thing that Jesus did during his ministry came from that single purpose. He called the disciples, he ate with sinners, he welcomed the lost, he forgave adulterers, he died on the cross. Everything Jesus did was around seeking and saving those that were lost. This is so important. This matters so much to God that he put an entire chapter in the Bible in Luke 15 about this very thing. Now, I heard a preacher almost 10 years ago preach an incredible sermon. His name was Rick Ashley. Many of the points that I heard him talk about in Luke 15, I'm gonna share with you today, and I hope they have the same kind of impact on you that they did for me. Luke 15 tells three different stories. Jesus tells three different parables, and it starts out just like this. Now, the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were muttering to themselves, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So that's the context. Jesus has got a crowd of people around him, and within this crowd, there's a small group of Pharisees, the religious leaders and people of his time. And they're looking around. Everybody's there to hear Jesus teach. Everybody knows that he's got something important to say. And as these Pharisees are looking around, they're seeing tax collectors and sinners, and they're saying to themselves, man, Jesus is supposed to be this really important spiritual leader. He claims to be close to God, talks to him like a friend, but look who he's hanging out with. He's hanging out with all these people that, quite honestly, just don't matter. Why is he wasting his time? Now, Jesus either hears them say that, or he knows this in his heart, and so he decides to tell three separate parables, and this is the first one. He says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and he says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Now, it's a really short story, but every single person in that crowd of people would have instantly understood what Jesus was talking about. Because whether you were a shepherd, whether you owned livestock or not, everybody knew what it meant when he started talking about sheep and shepherds. And so in the story, he says a shepherd goes out to get 100 sheep, and then somewhere along the way, one of those sheep wanders off. And then the shepherd, he's counting them up, he realizes I'm missing one, and so he leaves the 99, and he goes out he uses time, he uses energy, possibly at risk for himself. He goes out to find that one sheep. Now what's interesting is, we don't really have this context, like today, but sheep were not primarily prized for the meat that came from them. Sheep were primarily valued for the wool that they produced. You see, sheep weren't just, it wasn't just a source of food. When a shepherd would lose a sheep, he wasn't losing a meal or two, he was losing future income. And so it was a very big deal when a shepherd would lose a sheep. And so he went after that one sheep. Now, this story is not meant to be read from your head. It's meant to be read from your heart. Let me explain. If you read this story from your head, just from like mathematically speaking, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Think about it like as if you were an accountant, okay? The shepherd comes back and the accountant says, how'd it go today? And he said, man, not good at all. What do you mean? Well, one of the sheep wandered off. And the accountant says, how many? One. Okay. Well, listen, I'm gonna leave these right here. I'm gonna go find that one. An accountant who's reading the story from his head would go, wait a minute. You do realize that's 1%, right? Like in accounting, we might even call that acceptable losses. It's not that big of a deal. Don't leave the 99 to go find the one. Man, we'll make it up in the spring, but when the lambs are born, we'll have 20 of them. One is just not that big of a deal. But God is trying to communicate something through Jesus here. Now, have you ever lost something whose worth to you was greater than the dollar cost when you purchased it? Okay, I have. My dad gave me a Bible almost 30 years ago. Now, my dad died when he was about my age, in his mid-50s. And so that Bible, it meant a lot to me then. It really meant a lot to me after my dad passed away. And I kept that Bible in my hunting backpack. And so I'd go out during deer season, I'd climb a tree, I'd pull it down in my bag, and I'd read it every once in a while, put it back in there. It's just kind of where it lived. Well, one day, this is several years ago, I was out hunting. I got down out of my tree, got all the way back to my truck, and I'm getting all my stuff together, and I look around, I can't find that Bible anywhere. And I look in my bag, I look all over in the truck, I look around the bottom of the truck, thinking maybe it dropped out. I walk all the way back down the road, I walk all the way into the woods, into this swamp, up to my tree, and I'm looking for this Bible that my dad gave me, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And man, I'm gonna tell you, I was pretty upset about it. I called my wife, and I said, Beth, I've lost that Bible that my dad gave me. I can't find it anywhere. There's nothing I could do about it. I spent all the time I could, and I couldn't find it. So came home, I thought that Bible was lost. The next week, I went back to hunt the same spot. I pull my truck up, I get out of the truck to go sign in on the clipboard. And as I get out, I look over, and on a picnic table right next to this little clipboard is this Bible that my dad gave me. Some other hunter in the week in between it's a crazy story, had been walking through the woods or somewhere, had found this Bible, assumed somebody had dropped it and lost it, picked it up, put it on the picnic table, hoping that the owner would find it the next time he came by. And I did. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy to find this Bible my dad gave me. Now look, this Bible's nothing really special, okay? It's a men's devotional Bible. You can probably get it for $6 on Amazon, $6 maybe. But it's valuable because of what my dad wrote on the inside. Here's what he wrote. If you know the author, you'll love the book. Now listen, look, the page was torn. It's got dirt stains on it now. I don't take it out anymore. That Bible is worth so much more than the $6 I could replace it with. And maybe you can think of something. Maybe you have lost some pictures, maybe something that your kids made for you when they were little. Maybe before an international trip, you start looking around and you can't find your passport, and then you have to make an emergency meeting at the passport office to get it replaced. But you might have something like that. God put so much value on people, far more than what the religious accountants of the day did. They would say, Jesus, all these people that you're sitting around, these are all just acceptable losses. Why are you wasting your time? Jesus tells a second story about a woman who has 10 coins and loses one. She turns the whole house upside down. When she finds it, she calls everybody together and they celebrate. And then he tells the story of the prodigal son. Now, I think most people are probably familiar with the story of the prodigal son. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna summarize the first half of that, and then we'll finish up with what Jesus has to say about it. So in the story of the prodigal son, a father has 2 sons. And the younger son, right away, the younger son in the parable comes to Jesus and he comes to the father and he says, Dad, give me my share of the estate. All right. Now, here's what you need to know. We can't really brush past that too quickly because that very first detail would have shocked the crowd. Because here's the reality of the cultural norms of the day. If a father has 2 sons, the estate, the family wealth, the inheritance, always went to the older son, every time. There was a hierarchy, there was a lineage, and that younger son wouldn't have gotten it until much, much later in life, if at all. But the younger son comes to his dad and basically says this, Dad, you're living a lot longer than I expected you to. Basically, he's saying this. He's saying, hey, Dad, you know what? You're living longer than I actually want you to. And I want my share of the estate right now. And the dad, who realizes I can't force my son to stay, he does just that. Now, what's crazy is it's not like the inheritance or their estate, the family's wealth was wrapped up in like dollars in a bank account, all right? In that time, an estate or the family's wealth, their inheritance was wrapped up in land and livestock. And so the father would have had to go sign a deed and give a portion of the land and the livestock over to this younger son who skipped over his older brother and would have given it to him. And the reason the son went and sold that is because you can't fund parties on land and livestock. You gotta have money. And so he sold that. And Jesus says he went away to a foreign land and he squandered it all in wild living. And then a great famine comes to that land. and then there's no money left, and all the friends that temporary money can buy, it's all gone. And the younger son is in such a terrible situation that he hires himself out to feed pigs. Now, this is another detail, second detail of this story that would have elicited a mental gasp from the people who were listening, because no self-respecting Jewish man would have gotten anywhere near pigs. But this young man is in such a desperate state that he hires himself out, and as he's dropping trash and garbage and food scraps into the mud, he looks down and he says to himself, I am so hungry. I'm considering eating that. And so the son comes to his senses. And he decides, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna go back to my father. And he starts rehearsing a speech in his mind as he's on his way home. And he's saying out loud, this is what I'm gonna tell my dad. Father, I've sinned against heaven, I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he's saying this over and over and over again. Jesus is telling this story, and at that moment, the Pharisees and maybe even the other people who were sitting around in that crowd, they would have been sitting there thinking to themselves, like, surely this dad is not gonna take this kid back. I mean, the dad has done everything respectable. He's honorable. The guy has dignity. He hasn't made any mistakes. The young son has done, he was brazen, brash, egotistical, arrogant, selfish, all of these things. He made all those poor decisions. It's time for him to suffer the consequences. Surely dad's not gonna take him back. And then we pick up in verse 20. While the young man was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and he kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And then the dad interrupts his speech and he calls to a servant, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and so they began to celebrate. Now, the crowd of people that were around Jesus at that time, this would have been kind of like a mic drop moment, right? I don't know if anybody would have been making any noise, because Jesus has given a scandalous detail at the end of this story. The son is walking back, rehearsing this speech, and the dad is sitting on the front porch looking for his son. He hasn't written him out of the will that's left. He hasn't disowned him as a son. He's looking for him. And then when he sees him in the distance, this old man who is dignified, worthy of respect, who has servants that when he calls to them, they run to him. He hikes up his robes, shows his legs, which would have been a shameful position and posture for an older man to be in, and he runs to his son. Nobody had an image of God like that. Nobody thought God would dishonor himself and shame himself in that way. They thought God was sitting on his throne saying, you go to heaven, you go to hell. Well, I'm not sure about you. Jury's still out. We'll see about you. That's what they thought. But Jesus is painting a picture of a God who has compassion and emotion and empathy, because God cares about people. And if we don't understand that God's heart is for the lost, then we won't care enough when it's time for us to make our move. Now, each one of the three stories that Jesus told in Luke 15 starts with the big theme of separation. Something or someone of value was separated from the one who desired it and who wanted it badly. Now, in the church, we use certain words and terms for people who are not yet Christians, okay? We call them seekers. We call them unchurched. We'll say they're on a spiritual journey. And listen, I have used those terms in the past. I will continue to use them in the future. Our church will continue to use those words in the future. I'm not saying they're incorrect. I think they are accurate in a way. But Jesus never used those words. Jesus used the word lost. And if you really think about it, lost is a really, really uncomfortable word. Lost is a hard word to think about. Think about the sheep in the first story. You see, a lost sheep isn't just lost. A lost sheep is very literally a dead sheep. A lost sheep doesn't have the safety of the herd, The lost sheep doesn't have the security and the provision of the shepherd who can fight off predators or lead it to the right pasture so that it can eat, or lead it to water so it can drink. A lost sheep is in a desperate situation. And in the theology of Jesus, a person who is separated from God is in a desperate situation. They might not know it. They might not like it. They might not feel it. But according to Jesus, it's true. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Luke 15 shows us what the heart of God is all about. I want to shift gears here as we head towards the second half here. At the beginning of this service, you heard Joey's story. Joey told his story about a group of friends who made a move because Jesus made the move first. They showed up at his house, invited him to a Bible study. He responded with his move. Then he gave his whole story about how his life has been totally different. Now his family's life is different because of that. Now, I've just talked about God's perspective on evangelism, about talking to other people, about your relationship and your faith in Jesus. And here's what I want to do as we head towards the end here. I want to actually look at this idea of evangelism from the perspective of a person who is not a Christian at all. Now, I need to give you some context. You guys might be familiar. There's a very famous magician duo named Penn and Teller. These guys they're very famous celebrities. They do a show in Las Vegas and some other places, but they do this big magic show. Now, Penn Jillette is part of that duo. He's the one that talks, if you've ever seen any YouTube videos on this. So Penn is a very, very outspoken atheist to this day. Penn Jillette has talked about it, done interviews about it, he's written about it. He is a firm atheist. He had an encounter with a Christian after one of his shows almost 20 years ago. A Christian came up and talked to him about something. And then Penn Jillette went back and he recorded himself talking about that interaction. Watch this video and then let's talk about it for a couple of minutes.
I want to talk to you about this. I get home from the show, and at the end of the show, as I've mentioned before, we go out and we talk to folks and, sign an occasional autograph and shake hands and so on. And there was one guy waiting over to the side in the what I call the hover position after I was all done. Big guy, probably about my age. And he walked over to me and he said, I was here last night at the show, and I saw the show and I liked it. And he was very complimentary about my use of language and complimentary about, honesty and stuff. He said nice stuff. No reason to go into it. He said nice stuff. And then he said, I brought this for you. And he handed me a Gideon Pocket Edition. He said, I wrote on the front of it, and I wanted you to have this. I'm kind of proselytizing. And then he said, I'm a businessman. I'm sane, I'm not crazy. And he looked me right in the eye and did all of this. And it was really wonderful. I believe he knew that I was an atheist. But he was not defensive. And he looked me right in the eyes. And he was truly complimentary. It wasn't in any way, it didn't seem like empty flattery. He was really kind and nice and sane and looked me in the eyes and talked to me. And then gave me this Bible. And I've always said, that I don't respect people who don't proselytize. I don't respect that at all. If you believe that there's a heaven and hell and people could be going to hell or not getting eternal life or whatever, and you think that, it's not really worth telling them this because it would make it socially awkward. And atheists who think that people shouldn't proselytize, just leave me alone, keep your religion to yourself. How much do you have to hate somebody to not proselytize? How much do you have to hate somebody to believe that everlasting life is possible and not tell them that? I mean, if I believed beyond a shadow of a doubt that a truck was coming at you and you didn't believe it, that truck was bearing down on you, there's a certain point where I tackle you. And this is more important than that. And I've always thought that, and I've written about that, and I've thought of it conceptually. This guy was a really good guy. He was polite and honest and sane, and he cared enough about me to proselytize and give me a Bible, which had written in it a little note to me, not very personal, but just, like your show and so on. And then like 5 phone numbers for him and an email address if I wanted to get in touch. Now, I know there's no God, and one polite person living his life right doesn't change that. But I'll tell you, he was a very, very, very good man.
All right. I just want to highlight a couple of things that Penn said. He said, how can a person believe in heaven and hell and believe that a person could actually be going to hell and then not tell other people about it because it might make it socially awkward? Then he said this, which is really convicting to me personally. How much do you have to hate someone to know that eternal life exists and then not tell them about it? If there's a truck that's bearing down on you and you don't know it, but I know it's going to hit you, there's a certain point in time when I come out and I tackle you and I pull you to safety, and this is more important than that. These are statements coming from an atheist who does not believe in God. Now, there's some other things I could pull out of that video, and we could spend some time talking about it. But as we get close to the end here, I actually want to talk about the anonymous man that gave Penn Jillette that Bible. Now, I'm going to speculate on a few things here, but I believe I'm correct. I'm going to walk through this, and I want you guys to just come with me and see what it is that's possible for you and for me. Okay, I don't believe that this anonymous guy had a master plan to tell Penn Jillette about God. I don't think he did. I think this guy was simply on vacation and an opportunity came up. And here's why I think that. I'm gonna walk through some details. They're gonna seem minor and unimportant, but it's gonna matter in just a second, so just hang with me. I believe that this guy booked his plane tickets to go to Las Vegas weeks or months ahead of time. I believe he bought a hotel room. I'll tell you why. I think he was in a hotel room in just a second. I believe he bought a ticket online to go see the Penn and Teller show. I think he showed up that night. I think he was just on vacation. And then somehow he got picked from the audience as the audience participation member, called up on stage, went through the psychic, joke bit, whatever. He got the props. And as he walked out of the show, he noticed that Penn and Teller stand outside on the patio or whatever, shaking hands and signing autographs. I think this guy had a really pleasant time. And I think he went back home to his hotel room, back to his hotel room where he was staying. And I think some point after that moment, this guy started thinking to himself, you know what? I should tell Penn about the Lord. I really think, maybe it was that night, maybe it was the next morning, I think at some point in time he went, you know what? I should talk to Penn about God. And then he had to come up with some plan on how to do that. And so, you remember what kind of Bible the guy gave him? What did he say? It was a Gideon, right? Where do you find a Gideon Bible? In a hotel room. We all know that. It's the ministry of the Gideons, have been doing it for decades. I think this guy looked inside that drawer, found that Gideon Bible, wrote 5 phone numbers and an email address and a little note, went back the second day. This was from the previous day, right? Went back the second day, waited until the show was over. He knew it was gonna be over at what time. He knew they come out and they do this glad handing thing at the end. Waited, walked up to him and said, hey, I've got this Bible, I want you to have it. I think that's what he did. I don't think he had a master plan. I think he simply realized I have an opportunity to make my move. What am I gonna do now? I don't think that guy was worried about, does he know enough? I don't think he was worried about, man, Penn is a famous atheist who has thought this thing through and has talked about it on news shows and has talked about it in comedy acts. What if he asks me a question? What if he embarrasses me? I don't think he was worried about any of that. I don't think he was worried about how good he was at it. He didn't even have a Bible with him, for crying out loud. He had to steal one from a hotel room. I think he simply looked around and went, and I've got an opportunity here. I should do something. I think this guy was just simply, he was a normal guy like you and me, just living his life on mission. I think he was just living his life on mission, and he was thinking about the Lord, and he realized, you know what? I should just talk about the thing that I think about a lot. Now, as we get close to the end, Penn says, towards the end of that video, he says, I know there is no God. I know that. And one person living his life right doesn't change that. Now, here's the deal. Penn doesn't know there is no God. He believes that with conviction, okay? We know that. You and I know differently. We know that God exists. We know that Jesus is alive. When I was talking about this video with some people last week, I sent it to a couple of people, and I said, hey, would you just look at this thing? The video's a little bit longer than what we showed you guys. And I said, would you look at this video, and then would you tell me, do we need to cut a little bit off of the end or the front or whatever? One of the people called me right back, and they said, hey, listen, that video is great. I think it's gonna work out really well. But I just wish that Penn wouldn't have said, now I know there is no God. Because it's just so sad. And I knew right then, I said on the phone, I said, well, now I know I'm gonna make sure to leave that in there, because you know what? It is sad. And you know people, and I know people. You have people that you are in your family, that you live next to, that you work with, friends that you have, that are far, far from God, and they are in a desperate situation. And it is sad. But the good news is that God has a plan for them, and you are part of that plan. 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, and do this with gentleness and respect. What I'm gonna ask you to do this week, when you think about the people in your life that are far from God, that are in a desperate situation, and you realize it is sad, I don't want you to ignore that feeling. I don't want you to push it away. I don't want you to decide you're gonna wait for somebody else to talk about that with them. I want you to be ready to make your move when the time comes, because God is making his appeal through you and through me. Father, as we wrap up the beginning of this series, I just want to say out loud again, Lord, you know this, but just for the sake of everybody that's listening right now, Father, I know that this concept of evangelism, I know that it makes us nervous. I get it. And every person in here that has tried this in the past has some success stories, if we can call it that, and we've also have some times when we think, man, I really fumbled that one. I did not handle that one very well. But God, I pray that you will help us remember, saving people is not our job, that's your job. God, you have called us to tell other people about Jesus. That's what you've asked us to do. And God, it doesn't matter if we're very good at it. It doesn't matter if we know everything. You just ask us to make our move. And Father, I am so grateful that you didn't count me as an acceptable loss. I'm grateful you didn't call us acceptable losses and look for the people that were better or who had not made the mistakes. Father, give us your heart for lost people so that we will be ready when the time comes. In Jesus' name, amen.